No.
I would like to congratulate both teams for making it this far. I would like to congratulate both teams for making this far in this TWSDC 2025 in the August final. On side government, we have ICS2, and on side opposition, we have TWSDC4. So, I'll be your chair for this round. I'm Nomit, and I have my 4 panelists here.
Congratulations and good luck for your round.
Kanu, what's your name?
Thank you.
Antan.
Yeah, and I'm both. Congratulations both teams.
So without further ado, I would like to call this house to order on the motion. This house regrets the trivialization of young love. I would now like to invite Prime Minister to begin this debate. You're here.
I'll begin my speech on the next one. In today's world, trivialization is where relationships between young adults are less serious and deemed unimportant. The present narrative is that young adult relationships are believed to lack emotional depth and intimacy, which are regularly found in adult relationships. Now, what does this look like, panel? In the status quo, many young adults experience feelings toward others, but yet they receive no social acceptance or acknowledgement from their peers since it is deemed insignificant, especially with the narrative of this trivialization in place. This basically shuts off and disregards all their emotions. This results in them feeling like their emotions aren't significant and they don't learn to improve their emotional depth or maturity because they never are able to truly express or understand their emotions. Take 2 cases of young adult relationships. The first case is that these kids don't date at all due to the narrative that says that they shouldn't and that the normal adults in society disregard and disapprove of them having a relationship. The second case is these kids do date, but the society labels them as insignificant. Therefore, these kids do not treat the relationship maturely and responsibly. Both of these are negative effects of the narrative of trivialization. Both of these cases the kids have to have their feelings to be suppressed, and they are unable to acknowledge and understand their own emotion. We believe that if young love wasn't trivialized, and adults didn't disregard it, and it would open a pathway for kids to be openly expressive about their emotions and be able to experience and understand their own emotions. Then we think that this would be so much more beneficial to these kids in all throughout their life, and we will expand that more in my speech and my second speaker's speech. What we need to prove to you, panel, in order to win this debate, is that the trivialization of young love lacks emotion, causes the lack of emotional maturity for young adults. And secondly, we need to prove that a world where young love isn't trivialized would be much more beneficial to relationships in the long term. Panel, keep in mind that young love is not a bad thing. What the effects are is the topic of question in this debate. If we can prove to you that trivialization has led to many harms for young adults, then we win this debate. I'll be moving on to my first argument. The trivialization of young love has led to the lack of many core emotional skills in young adults. The first is the lack of emotional depth and maturity. For example, when you aren't able to deal with breakups and heartbreaks from a young age, breakups and heartbreaks are an important foundation for being able to deal with failure. By not having these important life lessons, it deeply changes your emotional depth and maturity, and it's much harder for you to experience these kinds of emotions at an early stage in life. Similar to how people who are spoiled or simply grow up in a rich family are never really able to experience their own hard work or are never able to experience failure, when they're suddenly faced with failure or the fact that they have to do the work for themselves, they are left shocked and they break down because they're unable to actually do anything because they've never experienced about it. And if that occurs in the later stage of life, we believe that that is much more harm to their lives rather than to improve it and learn through it in the early stage of life. When they can't even deal with it and they can't even comprehend failure, it causes them to not go very far in life or very far in their emotional capacity. I'd like to point out that failure from experience from emotional hardships are very different from everyday failures. A failure from just failing a test is not going to as deeply imprint into your mind as a failure from being compared in an important mental event. In order to improve your emotional depth and maturity and your emotional capacity, we believe that it truly needs to come, or in most cases, to be enough to be the majority, to be helpful, would need to come from an important mental event. You can't just read a book on how to ride a bike. You actually need to be there firsthand. And we believe in this case, where something as important as your mental capacity is at risk, this should be the first thing. Now I'd like to analyze this more and expand on what is a core memory. Core memories are memories that are important events within your life, shape your ideology, the way you think, the way you act, the way you treat people, down to your moral compass. This narrative of trivializing hinders the ability for young adults to be able to efficiently or effectively gain these skills, which are crucial for their future social life and their life in general. Another effect another effect is that they lack emotional security. In today's status quo, we see many examples of relationships in the later stage not working because their partners didn't have a good emotional maturity. We believe that this stems from some sort of way that in the early stages of life, they didn't truly experience these emotional life lessons that shape how you improve and how you think and how you react to these mental experiences. But by not having this, we've seen that by growing up and learning not to understand or acknowledge your romantic emotions, or simply just deal with your emotions in general, it is much harder to be able to deal with this later stage in your life. And like I have stated before, the harms of finding out that you can't deal with these emotions later in stages of life is much worse than when you are able to improve on this in the beginning. This comes from a trend where it is much harder to learn from failures and mature emotionally when they are in their late stages in life. And this results in, of course, like I have said, relationships that are not effective later on. We'd rather have young adults go through their mental and emotional experience and be able to improve and grow, rather than to grow up and be unable to deal with their emotional problems. And we see this as a better case on our side of the house, that they will be able to learn and improve before they have to go in the later stages of life that will be much harder to learn back from. Data and many trends, both scientifically and just in the status quo, clearly show that it is much harder to change simply just habits or your ideology in your later stages of life. For example, if a kid were to tell an adult simply something in their ideology that was wrong, it'd be much harder for the adult to be open about it or simply change their mind about it in their later stage of life. Whereas when your cognitive capacity, or simply just you be more open to new ideas, or just simply learning and improving your mental capacity when you were younger. The bottom line is that trivialization is causing young adults to grow up without the essential emotional maturity and core life skills needed. For something so morally important as knowing how to treat a girl right, or vice versa, when something as important as being able to deal with negative feelings is much lacking in young adults, we see this as a pressing problem. And this is why we deeply regret the trivialization of young life. For all these reasons, we are proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for his fine speech. Uyghur spoke for 7 minutes and 10 seconds. I would now like to invite Leader of Opposition to give the first response. Here, here. Here, here.
Firstly, as side opposition, I would like to clarify some things that they have been misunderstanding, which is that we are not saying that these relationships are bad, and we're not saying that these relationships should not be happening, but we're simply saying that these relationships can be seen as less serious for the benefits of the young adults and when they grow into adults as well. So in my debate today, I have 3 rebuttals, 2 arguments, and 3 points of setup. Firstly, I would like to start off with my rebuttals, which everything that they have said that is happening in their side can also happen in our side. So actually, both sides are symmetrical, and they're trying to assume that they're making an assumption that kids will lack emotional depth and security, whereas our side, kids still have relationships and depth, but in our side, what is different is the effects are not that bad because they're not taken as seriously. Side government also said that it will hinder the learning, and what we say is that it is not saying that kids won't have relationships. We say that what they have to go through is way less than what side government is saying. Moving on to my first point of setup, which is the status quo in their world. In their world, young love is serious, and they have this narrative of teenagers who narrative through social media, for example, posting about different forms of relationship and matching profiles, matching accounts, and it creates an idealistic view that is actually not true. And you can also see this through TV shows like Disney, where you find your prince at 16 and you marry them for the rest of your life, which this is just a narrative that has been misunderstood. And you can also see this through other things like friends and families, such as where you go to a dinner and they ask where's your boyfriend, or keep bragging you and talking about this. But how it is internalized to the kids is that they think it is more serious than it actually is, and they feel they're stuck in a world where they're exposed to a limited amount of information, where they think that this is the only way they can get the attention of the society, and they feel they need to get into a relationship, which by doing this can cause more harm than good. Whereas in our world, our narrative is that young love is not as serious, which the perpetuation is the same as both sides have things on social media, but the way that these things are internalized is different, because these kids and parents feel less obligated to follow what they do. So we're saying that as they find it as not as serious, it's they see it as not a big deal, and they can continue their lives, do whatever they want more happily. And my second point of setup is I'm going to be characterizing the kids and how they develop. So our main stakeholders are the kids and parents and the society as a whole. So the kids are mostly the most vulnerable actor of today's debate. They lack a lot of experience. They're not as mature as adults, and they, with their age, they can be heavily influenced by the things that they hear on the media or people surrounding them. So when they hear things like gossip and on things online, they create again this idealistic view of love. But what the kids are actually is that they have a very, very busy school life, and they most likely are in high school or in college where they don't have a lot of time to focus on other things, as they're going through puberty and they're still trying to find an identity and they're still trying to find themselves. So they should not be solely reliant on a partner. And parents, we're going to be splitting parents into 2 different sides, which is the tiger parents and the shield parents. These parents all have to have a crucial part in the kid's life, as and we're being very charitable here and saying that both cases will be bad for kids. For tiger parents, the parents will be strict. They'll want the kids to focus on their studies, and the kids will have to maybe keep their relationship a secret, which is further bad for their future and for their management of their time. But for shield parents, they don't really care. They let their kids do anything, which is also bad for their future, which this is symmetrical on both sides. Our burden is that we're going to, with this narrative, we're going to prove that it's going to be better for the society as a whole. And my leading on to my first argument, which is why kids seeing relationships as serious as a bad thing. Firstly, my first layer of analysis, they have this like romanticized view, so they feel like it is perfect and they feel like they need it, so they feel like they're falling behind on love. And so how is this bad? This is bad like as they're trying to do everything to get into like the perfect relationship, as they don't realize that that perfect relationship may not actually exist, but they're still trying to search for it, which will further cause more problems for their mental health, their long-term growth, and which my second speaker will develop on. And my second layer of analysis, which is the comparison from our side and your side, which is on government side, the kids spend way more time and effort creating and trying to maintain this like perfect relationship, even though they don't realize that it is more harmful. And in our side, we're not saying that the mental health like wouldn't happen. We're not saying that in our world like the kids are perfect, but we're just saying that it could still happen, but there's a less likely chance and a more chance that it is not as severe as what would happen in the government's case. So at the end, basically in government side, we can just clearly see that the kids especially will be receiving more harm than good. And it is less likely to, and furthermore, like the kids are less likely to focus on what's actually important for them, rather, and like pursuing their passions and finding what they want to do rather on like the relationship. And my second argument is about the impact young love has when they break up and like they don't work out. So on our side, as we have said, they focus their life solely on one person, and they could like have less connection with their friends and families. So they feel like their world has collapsed, and like they spend months and even years like in this like vulnerable state. Whereas as in opposition side, they could like feel like they have spent less time and less like investment into this situation, so they don't feel as like hurt. And why is this different to adults? Because adults have a less idealistic view and they can handle like more mature situations because they're past the age and they have like a stable job and they live in a world where it's like really like more in touch with reality. So even if we're being charitable, we say that adults have. Oh, I'm so proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Leader of Opposition for their fine speech. Speakers spoke for 8 minutes 23 seconds. I would now like to invite Deputy Prime Minister to continue their case with you.
First off, I'm going to be starting off with a couple of rebuttals and then moving on to arguments. First, panel noticed that side opposition is entirely ignoring the fact that young love in the status quo is trivialized and is treated as something that is insignificant and something that children shouldn't pursue, yet side opposition keeps trying to push that these children are trying to pursue the perfect relationship that they see in the media, whereas the entire society is trivializing this young love. So we see that this doesn't make sense. Now, moving on to our first rebuttal, side opposition has stated that they're not saying that relationships shouldn't be a thing, and they said that kids on their side of the house are also pursuing relationships as well. However, we see that that is exactly the problem, right? The kids on their side of the house are pursuing relationships, and in these relationships, they have adults, they have parents, they have society telling them that their relationship does not matter, and that their relationship is so insignificant, that it's so fleeting, that they shouldn't even, try to pursue it, and they shouldn't even try to continue that relationship, because it's so trivialized to have a relationship with young love. Secondly, my second rebuttal, side opposition has said that on our side of the house, the kids will keep their relationship secret, which is bad, especially in the case with tiger parents, right? However, we see that this harm is exacerbated even more on their side, where young love is trivialized, where young love is deemed as insignificant, where young love is deemed as something that shouldn't matter. And we see that when these kids have all of these narratives and have all of these ideas ingrained into their head, that is to the point where they feel the need to hide it, and they feel the need to hide that relationship. We said that that harm of hiding the relationship from their parent that they tried to focus on is much worse on their side of the house, right? Now, thirdly, they said that kids easily get influenced by what they hear, and that is why when they see social media or they see stories, fairy tales of princesses or whatever, they're going to want to pursue a perfect relationship. However, what my first speaker has already been pushing, has already been telling you, is that what these kids are hearing that is overpowering everything else is these adults and these society telling them that that young love is insignificant, and that their feelings shouldn't be something that they should show, and should be something that is oppressed and suppressed. Now, lastly, they say that adults have more maturity, right? So then they think that young adults don't have this maturity to be able to carry on a good relationship, and the adults, when they grow older, will have enough maturity to do so. However, we tell you that, as our first speaker said, if these adults have been taught their entire lives before they became adults that their feelings of love for each other didn't matter that much, and that when they're young, their feelings are insignificant, then we don't see how they're going to suddenly develop this emotional maturity within relationships when they reach the age above 18, right? Because their entire life before then, they didn't have the chance to experience it, didn't have the chance to take it seriously. So we don't see how when they get older, suddenly they're going to be able to have this maturity. Okay, now I'm going to be moving on to my arguments, but I'll take your feedback first.
You said that they're forced to not have a relationship, but actually we're just saying that they can have a relationship, but it's not going to be taken as seriously. So they'll still have the experiences in the past, but it's just not taken as seriously as compared to other people.
Okay, I will go through this further into my argument, but we see that it's worse when they have a relationship and they're told to not take it seriously. Because when they're in a relationship and an adult are like, oh, it's insignificant, don't take it seriously, it's just going to lead to more harm in their life, right? Because they're basically going to not take that emotional connection between another person seriously, which is going to lead to more harm in the future and in their childhood as well. Now, moving on to my first argument, where I see that in a world where young love wasn't trivialized, it would be so much more beneficial to relationships in the long term. So on the opposite side of the coin, right, that is not in the status quo right now, we see that it would be so much better where there's a world where young love isn't deemed insignificant, silly, and as of less importance. And it's a world where parents, our friends, and guardians are actually there to help these young adults navigate their experiences, tell them that it's not something that they should take lightly, and tell them that their emotions and feelings should be put to the same level of importance as adults' feelings, because it doesn't matter what age you are for your feelings to matter and for feelings to be for your feelings to actually be taken seriously, right? So then we see now where these young adults are experiencing these relationships and experiencing these young loves with the mindset that it should be something that they take seriously and not something that is trivialized by the entire society. We see that when they grow up and then get into relationships again, when they get older, right? Since they were younger, they've been learning how to handle these relationships. They had the opportunities to handle it in a serious way. They've learned through their mistakes, learned how to manage their time, how to invest, and they had all of the experiences that were present for them because it wasn't trivialized to have love at a young age. We see that now they learn how to act in a relationship, and at the very least, they know how to deal with their feelings, and they know how to deal with their emotions, and they know how to express their emotions and how to handle themselves in a relationship with other people. And It's just because when they're younger, right, these adults didn't trivialize this young love, and they didn't treat their feelings as something that was of little importance. And that is why these children are now incentivized to actually treat their relationships more seriously, which is moving on to my second argument, which is that children are going to reciprocate how adults treat their relationship, right? And even as side opposition has stated, children's minds are pliable and then they take in a bunch of information, right? So then when they see that in their world, there are adults telling them that the relationship doesn't matter, and they're hearing from their elders and their parents that the relationship is something that is fleeting and insignificant, and something that, like, you know, is not as important as real adult relationships. I think we, in our side of the house, believes that these children are now conditioned to believe that this relationship isn't serious, which is leading them to treat it with the seriousness that it, with like not the seriousness and not the amount of thought that it deserves, right? So now, what we see would be these children putting in less effort into their young love relationships if they even get to one, despite the trivialization of this young love. And we see that now they don't see the need to seriously invest because everyone else around them is telling them that it's insignificant, it's not going to last, it's fleeting. So we see now that they're going to be treating these relationships in a way that is harmful to both them and their partner, right? And we think that it's going to cause so much harm to them in the long run as well, because now they were taught at such a young age to believe that that feeling didn't matter and that they should suppress it. So overall, we believe that the trivialization of young love has had serious negative impacts on relationships for young adults and for adults in the long term, right? Because at a young age, they've been conditioned to believe that it wasn't, their feelings didn't matter as much as adults, which led to them having unhealthy relationships in the long run and having less emotional maturity and having less ability to handle the relationships as they get older. And that is why I'm so proud to propose.
Prime Minister for their final speech. Speakers will for 7 minutes and 51 seconds. Before going to the LO, whenever you POI, can you please use the mic so everyone can hear you? It's not. Anyways, I would now like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue off the case.
To start off my speech, I think there needs to be some clarifications in this debate on why government side has been actually ignoring our case. So firstly, my first clarification about the perfect relationship. My first speaker probably, if you haven't listened, our perfect relationship of this narrative is actually for your side of the house. Why? Because we both agree in both sides that the way that this young love is being perpetuated is through social media and friends and families, right? But the thing is that the difference between our both sides is that your side is going to take this relationship more seriously, right? And why is it not good? I will later explain why in my later argument, right? Second clarification, you've always stated that our side of the house will not have experience and no emotional maturity for our side of the house. However, that is not true, right? Because why? Because even if these children, they grow up without any experiences, I think it will still be symmetrical on both sides of the house, where if your side still thinks that children will have more serious and they haven't experienced any experiences, will still be symmetrical on both sides of the house when they grow up to be an adult and they will have a more serious relationship. And even if, I'm going to be very charitable here right now, okay? Even if they had experience, right, in your side of the house, right, you're gonna go through this process where kids are gonna feel obligated to give more time, more effort, or more, like they're gonna have to compromise in order to receive this perfect relationship that they're gonna have being perpetuated online. So you're gonna struggle with love, and I'm gonna explain why in my why these kids will struggle in my rebuttals, right? So firstly, when you said about how the society or like these adults won't allow children to be in a relationship in their side of the house, we think that that is not true. As I already stated from my first speaker, that these relationships do matter. We're not disregarding that relationships don't matter for these young adults. We just think that they should not be taken seriously to the point that like it's gonna become their first priority when they're still a vulnerable child, from my characterization that my first speaker has just given for these kids, right? So even if you say that these parents will be tended to not listen or not approve of their relationships, we don't think that that is true for you to assume that, because I feel like it's more like logical for a parent to actually agree on a relationship when they know the relationship is not going to become serious to the point that like they're gonna like focus on the relationship rather on their studies and their future, where their side of the house will have to prove that why like relying on the relationship is better than relying on their future, as their side of the house proposed that, right? So next on my like another rebuttal about how it will be more beneficial as their parents are there to help. As already said, the parents will not actually help. I don't think they mechanized on how these parents will actually help these children, because firstly, my first speaker already gave you two characterization of two different types of parents, which is the parents who's more chill and the tiger parents who are probably like more inclined for the child to for the child to be more focused on their studies, right? For the chill parents, right? So what we mean by these chill parents is that the parents are not like against the relationship. They don't really care on what the children does. But what does this mean, right? So in their side of the house, if these child are focusing on the relationships and the parents don't care about if their child is in a relationship or not, this leads to the child becoming more prioritized to what they want in the relationship. What does this mean? For example, they're probably gonna like want to spend more time with their partner rather than probably doing other stuff that's better for their future, maybe focusing on a test, providing for a test, or even learning something new as a hobby or skill. Because why? As this motion already states, this is about prioritizing your time. And my first speaker already stated why this is different to adults, as adults has already gone through a sense of maturity, so they already know what is better in terms of time management and how to handle a relationship. And I already said about like even if they had no experience, adults, they already went through this maturity state where they have better time management than these kids, because these kids are still vulnerable and they're still trying to discover themselves, as my first speaker has already characterized. So moving on, right? So what if it's the tiger parents, right? Where the tiger parents are gonna force wanting the kids to focus more on their studies. So what does this mean? When the tiger parents know or just think that when their child is in a relationship, right? And the tiger parents, they don't want their kids to be going out and spending time with their boyfriend or something, right? What does this mean? When the kids prioritize the relationship more, this leads to the kids wanting to sneak out. What does this lead to? The kids wanting to rebel. This will lead on to my first argument on why actually not taking relationships seriously for young adults is actually better in the long run for society, right? First layer of analysis is about the kids. Kids will still have the experience in both sides of the house. I already stated that, and that is symmetrical, right? But the thing is that in our side of the house, we will have a higher likability of chance kids focusing on themselves and not putting everything in their power, in their will, to actually for these relationships, right? So because they're not obligated to make their first relationship their first love. They're not obligated to make this relationship and give them everything, because we already stated that we don't think that young love should just be about kids giving everything they got. I mean, yeah, they're probably gonna give you something, but not everything about their time and compromise and everything. So in our side of the house, kids are still gonna learn. Kids are still gonna get a sense of maturity. Well, in their house, they're probably gonna still get a sense of maturity. But when they go through the breakup, which I will later on analyze why it's gonna be worse in their side of the house and why they said breakup is essential. We think breakup is also essential, but the thing is that in their side of the house, the effects of these breakups is actually worse for them, because they're gonna be unable to actually realize on like just realize, like, imagine yourself, right? Like, you spend so much time on one thing, and for that one thing to not work out, that essentially demotivates you so much to the point that you don't even want to do it again. This probably leads in their side of the house to these kids not actually wanting to actually experience this love again, because the toxic love, the toxicity of this love for the relationship not to work out is probably so demotivating for them to not even wanting to love again, right? And secondly, these kids are going to be more focused on themselves on our side of the house, as these kids will be able to work for their future while still having a relationship, but not as important as their side of the house, right? So secondly, on my second analysis about the parents, as already stated, in our side of the house, we would have a better connection between the child and parent, because why? As I already stated in my analysis about the tiger parents, right? These parents will become enraged when the child is going to become more focused about their relationship, right? Leading to kids rebelling or leaving the house to go to their boyfriend's house to hang out, right? Because they're going to prioritize them over their parents. However, in our side of the house, we already explained to you on why these children will be more focused on their family, because like they're not going to prioritize their relationship as much. Well, yeah, it's obviously good to learn from it, but however, we're not going to prioritize as it's less serious in our side of the house. And we think that the kids will trust their parent far more than their partner, because obviously they've been living with their parents this whole time, and for their side to say that their relationship is going to be suddenly more important in their side of the house, this will lead to them not actually having a connection with their parents. And I'm going to explain on why this connection is important, is because family bonds in the future is actually very important, especially for young adults going through these teenage years, right? With big disagreements and something going along with rebellion, this will lead to a very bad connection and society in their side of the house. Never been harder to oppose.
Speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 9 seconds. I would now like to invite government with to finish off their substantive speeches.
Okay, so first I'm going to be going through some rebuttals, and then later on to the two main clashes that I found during this argument. Okay, so my first point of rebuttal is when side opposition says that these kinds of relationships are being prioritized and it takes these students' times away from things such as their studies and their school and stuff. However, in our side of the house, we believe that this is even more harmful on their side, which I'll get to later. But first, I would like to say that on our side of the house, we believe it is even better to learn how to navigate these relationships in a mature and responsible way in a young age, and especially when you have a good support system, like your parents, your guardians that are with you, that are likely not going to be as around, as supportive when you're already mature and grown up, right? And then we also say that this is more harmful on their side. Why? Because they say that we're taking these young adults' times away from like school studies and stuff. But on their side of the house, when you try to prioritize these relationships and make it serious when you're already older, meaning you have a job where you have to provide for yourself and stuff, isn't that going to take their time away from earning like a good living? So we don't really see how this is a big issue in our side of the house. Then second point of rebuttal is when side opposition says that we say that on their side of the house, these young adults have no experience, therefore they have a lack of emotional maturity. And they say that this is symmetrical on our side, on both sides of the house, because they assume that these kids are going to grow up and suddenly become more serious, be able to navigate these relationships. However, our side of the house would like to respond by saying there has been no clear mechanization on how this is going to occur. How, when these kids grow up, they're suddenly going to have the maturity in order to know how to navigate these relationships, right? And we have already been tackling this ever since our very first speaker, when they have already said that you need to experience this firsthand manually in order to know. We gave you this comparative to, like, for example, learning how to bike, when you need to you can't just read the bike manual. You need to get on it responsibly and safely in order to know how to bike well, right? So we've already tackled this, so we don't think this point stands on their side. And my next point of rebuttal is when side opposition says that in our side, these young adults feel obligated to give more time and have to compromise with their partner, right? However, in our side of the house, we have a couple responses to this, but first we think it's a good thing if they're able to learn how to compromise at a young age on issues and immaturely instead of on their side of the house when you compare it, right? When on their side of the house, these kids don't know how to maturely hawk things out. They don't know how to maturely and responsibly work things in a relationship because of this narrative that is being pushed towards them, how these relationships are fleeting, how they're childish and immature, right? So we believe this is much better for them in the long term, which my previous speakers have also already mentioned. And my next point of rebuttal is when they say that these children are not obligated to give everything they want into the relationship. However, our side of the house has never mentioned at all that these kids need to give everything and prioritize this as their #1 priority. So they're basically ignoring what we have said and put these false words into our mouths, which we never said. And they also have no mechanization as this. And my last point of rebuttal is when they say that there are more tiger parents on our side of the house. However, we say that these tiger parents actually exist on their side of the house because they're pushing this false narrative that these kids are immature, their relationships are childish, right? But on our side of the house, we have kind, loving, and understanding parents who actually teach their kids how to navigate these relationships, and they don't suppress their feelings. They understand them. They help them in these really important issues. So that's just okay. And now moving on to my 2 clashes. So my 2 clashes I've identified during the speech. The first one being a child's maturity, and my second clash being which house has better long-term effects on relationships. So going on to my first clash, which is maturity, here's what our side of the house has given you. So we were able to tell you clearly how when these kids have this emotional maturity, they are able to have these relationships when this narrative of, this narrative is not being pushed onto them, which leads to relationships that don't assume these superficial and fleeting aspects, but instead relationships that are able to be handled with maturity and seriousness, which pays them the ability to get through conflicts together in a more mature way, instead of just treating it as something childish, something that they can easily run away from, which we believe is really problematic on their side of the house. And we also were able to say how in their side of the house, these adults wave it off, these relationships off as something insignificant and fleeting. Therefore, they don't have this incentive to navigate this relationship responsibly, because these trusted guardians and adults that they actually look up to try to paint or portray these things as something that is not important and insignificant. Therefore, they would have no incentive in order to be able to be mature in this relationship, right? And now let's see what their side of the house has given us. So they said, starting from the first speaker, how these young adults will naturally develop these kinds of maturities when they grow up, right? When they get stable jobs or something, whatever they mentioned. And however, our side of the house says that there has been absolutely no mechanization as how that would randomly even happen. They can't just grow up and be like, boom, okay, now I know how to fully navigate a relationship and seriously and maturely when I have never even been in this kind of situation before, right? Because their side of the house is pushing on this narrative to these young adults. So we believe that our side of the house has won this clash because we've been able to give you clear mechanizations on how our side of the house provides these kids with emotional maturity because they're actually able to treat their relationship seriously, right? Instead of their side of the house, which falls under this really false assumption that they're suddenly going to learn it when they grow up. Okay. And my second last clash is who has better long-term effects in relationships. So let's see what our side of the house is given to you. We say that these young adults are able to practice this maturity from a young age and how to go about a relationship healthily without viewing it as something insignificant or fleeting, right? And we also say that in our world, there are parents and guardians that are out there to help them navigate these relationships, be their support system, and it helps them incentivize to put more responsibility and effort and importance in these relationships, right? Because they're able to handle this at a young age. Therefore, we already recognized since the first speaker that they would be able to stick through their heads more as they've been practicing it from when they were still very young. We gave you a comparative on their side of the house where these young adults don't learn this at a young age. And even if they were in a relationship in their side with this harmful narrative being pushed onto them, they won't treat their relationship with maturity or responsibility. And when they grow up, they're not going to be able to have all this maturity that they need in order to maintain a good, healthy, serious relationship. So let's see what their side of the house is providing for us. They say that these kids have other priorities, like school or something, which will be hindered if these relationships are prioritized.
But we answered that how are they able to learn how to improve and go about their mature relationships when they have never been able to practice this at a young age? So we don't see how these long-term effects and benefits would be present in their side of the house. And secondly, they say how these adults are more mature, right? As I already mentioned before, they assume that these adults become more mature as they grow up. But yes, they come over this false assumption that these adults will suddenly be mature, which we have already stated since the first speaker and my previous speakers why this would not be the case. And further on, they never really actually tackled how this would have better long-term effects in relationships. And they also have no mechanization as to why their assumption would actually manifest into a reality. So that's why we went on both these two clashes, and this is why I'm so proud to propose.
Thanks for moving good for your fine speech. Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 37 seconds. I would now like to invite opposition to conclude opposition's case here.
I want you to notice how their side of the case have not responded to any of our rebuttals or any of our points and have clearly misunderstood our entire case. Firstly, on our rebuttals on how parents don't help, and since they haven't responded to my second speaker's rebuttal, and I will expand on that in my clarifications later on as well. And we have given you so many evenness which have never been responded and you have completely ignored us, which is you have been so uncharitable in this debate, and you're narrowing this debate down to what is convenient for you. Starting off with my clarifications on the misunderstandings of our case and the misunderstandings of their case. They say that there's been going back and forth of these parents will be supporting these relationships more seriously when they will be supporting these kids more when these relationships are more serious. Which we have already stated that in the society that we are proposing today, these narratives of these relationships not being as serious or not leading to being the only relationship in their entire lives are perpetuated and are put onto these kids and adults. Which means that not only these adults are the ones who are thinking that, this relationship is gonna last, this relationship is the most serious relationship, but the kids also realize that their relationship that they are in right now are not the only relationship that is gonna fully determine their entire lives, or not the only relationships that they're gonna have in their entire lives. They then put out the something about bikes and how you cannot ride a bike by reading, or you cannot ride a bike by reading a book. But we are not saying that these kids are not going to go into relationships. We're not saying that these kids just aren't going to have any experience at all. But we're saying that by these kids going into relationships with the mentality and with the thought process of oh yeah, I'm going into this relationship, but this isn't going to be my true love. This isn't going to be the only relationship that I have in my entire life, which makes them more open to learning about new problems and learning that, okay, not only these relationships will help me build up my future, but then I don't have to I don't have to only base my life around this relationship for it to work, because they can be other relationships in my future as well. Moving on to my rebuttals on what they said is that kids will be less emotionally mature on our side because they don't have the experience or whatever. Let's have a comparison here. Would you rather, on your side, one kid thinking that their relationship has to be perfect, or this relationship has to lead to them living with their boyfriend, or this relationship has to lead to marriage, with the kid going through one toxic relationship that maybe the kids don't even fit well together, but they just have the incentive that I have to make this work. I have to compromise everything about me. I have to compromise everything that I have to compromise my work. I have to compromise everything in my life, school and everything, to make this work and make this relationship work, and make them also solely rely on this one partner, that when they break up, it makes them even more emotionally distraught and lowers their emotional mentality. Whereas on our side, we allow these kids to have an open mind on getting into different relationships and focusing on, like, okay, maybe if this one perfect relationship is not working for me, or if this one perfect relationship, or if this one relationship isn't actually connecting to me, then I can just move on and learn through what went wrong in that relationship and so on. Moving on to my clashes. My first clashes is which is better for these kids. In our world, we are saying that these kids will be viewing relationships as something not as serious, and just as like a stepping stone towards their future, to having more serious relationships in their future, which is them going into their relationships not focusing on the partner, but focusing on themselves more, not having the obligation to fix everything, and just not having the obligation to have the perfect relationship, and not having to compromise. Okay, I would also like to clarify with their point on them saying that this compromise can be good. We agree that this compromise can be good, but it is good to a certain extent. If you compromise too much, like on your case is suggesting, this is probably already going to be a bad thing towards the kids. Whereas on our side, okay, we can compromise, but we're not compromising to the extent where you are compromising everything in your life. You're compromising to the point where you have a boundary where you say, okay, I have compromised enough, this relationship just isn't working and I want to end it. And why is this more beneficial on our side? We say that both sides, like my first and second speaker have already clarified, that both sides have the same results of emotional maturity, even more on our side maybe. But what is significant on our side is that these kids will be more focused on their own lives instead of this one personal relationship. And this leads me on to my second class, which is better in the long run and which is better for society as a whole. In our world, kids will be more focused on academics, like my speakers have already said. They're trying to find themselves through these relationships, having more experience, as well as having better education and probably better mental health from not stressing themselves over this one relationship too much. In your best case, these kids will, we say that they get emotional maturity and they go into these relationships more mature, but what about all the external factors, and what about all the factors that are affecting the society as a whole, not just these kids, not just these one kids, and how is this going to affect their future outside of these relationships? In our side, these kids will be emotionally mature because they have gone through different types of relationships, they've gone through the ups and downs, and they have broken up, they've gone through the processes that they need in order to mature emotionally, as well as not only focusing on their relationships solely, but focusing on their relationships with their families and friends and getting more knowledge and getting a better future in their life as a whole, which leads to my point on society, which is on our side, as these kids have focused not solely on their relationships, not solely focusing on their love and their teenage loves, then they're able to open themselves more, have more study time, focus more on schools, have better family bonds, as well as getting more emotional experiences in other ways and shapes and forms. On their side, they're only receiving this emotional maturity, as they have said, because they have not clarified or they have not mechanized how this will lead to anything else. And it is definitely not more beneficial towards society as a whole either. Both sides have emotional maturity and both sides have emotional stability, with only our side getting the external benefits of having a better life, having a better future, rather than just wasting their teenage years running away, trying to fix this one problem that they have in their relationship, trying to fix this one relationship that might not even last or might not even be their last relationship, just because of the narrative that people say that they have to fix this relationship, they have to work through this, because there's a narrative that their teenage years, their teenage loves is so serious to the point where they're going to live together, they're going to move in together, they're going to have their entire lives together. And on a whole, this debate is about society as a whole, not only the maturity and not only the emotional maturity on their side. Their side has not countered any of our points on why our side is better for society, but they have only focused on why their side will provide more emotional maturity, and dare I say, their side will actually provide less emotional maturity as well. If you are solely focusing on this one relationship, then you have no time to be focusing on anything other, any other mature places in your life, which is why I'm so proud to oppose.
I would like to thank opposition for their fine speech. Speakers spoke for 8 minutes and 12 seconds. I would now like to invite opposition reply to conclude opposition's side of their
I think about this debate, there's two main reasons on which side will actually win this debate on. However, I want to start off by saying like what government has failed to prove in their debate, right? So throughout their case, it's based on an assumption that parents will magically approve so that the society will be better. Because at the end of the day, we're not only talking about how they're trying to push to, as my lip already said, that they're trying to push so that the debate into one certain point. However, this debate is still about the society as a whole. So they can't just assume that the parents will magically approve. And even if they did, they never mechanized on how this will even happen. However, in our side, we already said that how this will not happen, and they still have not responded to this rebuttal as well, right? So secondly, we also gave you so many even ifs, being very charitable to your side, and you are still continuing not to respond to our even ifs, and these even if rebuttals still answers some of your rebuttals and your points, since you haven't even noticed since the beginning of the debate, right? So moving on, right? There has been two main questions that still has to be answered for each side to win, right? So which side has a higher maturity? So firstly, we think that even if their side has a higher maturity, the impacts and the effects that will create due to this high maturity will still be bad for the kid overall in the long run. Our side of the house have stated multiple times on how this high maturity from trying to always think about marriage or think about having to compromise to your partner always is actually very bad. And we always clarified this so many times, and even if they had a sense of high maturity, they're gonna go through this relationship thinking that they have to give it their all to receive that marriage point. And when the relationship does end due to the vulnerability and the characterization that my first speaker already said, that how the inconsistency of being a child and as they're going through life, filled with there's basically going through life and not knowing what's gonna happen, right? So even if they had a sense of high maturity, they're still gonna hurt the kids more than our side. So secondly, which side is better for the kids, right? We think that it is symmetrical, that both sides of the house will receive a sense of maturity. However, we've stated multiple times that our side will also receive, it's not like we're not gonna be in a relationship at all. Obviously, we're still gonna be in a relationship, and we're still not gonna hurt the kids as much because the kids are not gonna focus reliably on what is actually going on in this relationship. Well, yeah, they're gonna say sorry if something bad happens. Obviously, they're gonna learn from these mistakes, but it's not to the point that they're gonna always think about marriage, right? They're not always gonna think about living together in the same house or in the same roof. So moving on to why we actually win this debate and prove to you why our side of the house has won clearly. So firstly, we have proved that in this debate, what is being perpetuated is the same. However, the way that this is being perpetuated on both of the sides, how it's being internalized, is actually different. We've stated multiple times that these kids, right, they're gonna internalize this as it's a learning curve, it's a stepping stone. My first speaker and second speaker has already stated multiple times, even if it's not clearly, it's basically a stepping stone on the kids' learning curve also, right? However, even if it's the same case for their side of the house, it's still gonna hurt them even more, right? Because the way that this works is that their side of the house is gonna hurt the kids even more. Secondly, it's gonna lead to a better society where the kids are still gonna be able to date in our side of the house, learn from their mistakes, while still working on their future without having to worry about the concept of marriage to begin with. So throughout this debate, I think that government has been very selfish, not responding to any of our rebuttals or arguments, and just been focusing on their point to one point so that it's convenient for their side of the house. Never been proud to oppose.
I would like to thank opposition reply for their fine speech. Speakers spoke for 4 minutes and 13 seconds. I would now like to invite government reply to conclude this debate. Here.
Okay, first I'll be starting with a couple of rebuttals and then moving on to the weighing of the cases in this debate, right? So first off, side opposition keeps pushing that they've been so charitable with their case, when really they've kept saying and putting words in our mouths saying that we're saying that this relationship has to lead to marriage, has to lead to these kids living together, and that these kids not necessarily have the narrative that they have to live under the roof of their 13-year-old partner in the future. And first response to this is we've never said that taking this seriously means that you're going to have to strive for their relationship to become marriage, to become a real life adult, living under the same roof, right? As throughout the entire bunch, we've characterized this taking the relationship seriously as one, having the parents actually take it seriously in the way that they're teaching their children how to balance this relationship with others, teaching them how to compromise, teaching them how to balance this life with this relationship, right? We've never said that taking it seriously means that the child is going to strive to get married with this young partner, right? And we say that it's extremely uncharitable for side opposition to be claiming all the time that the seriousness is going, it means that these children are going to suddenly have, feel pressure to live with the other partner, right? Okay. Now, some opposition also keeps talking about how these young adults are going to sacrifice everything, right? Yeah, we've already reiterated before that these parents are going to treat this relationship more seriously, which means that this involves giving these children advice on how to navigate this relationship. This means that they're going to teach them how to balance their life. This doesn't mean that the parents are going to taking this relationship seriously means that they're not going to let their child just throw away their life for this relationship. Taking it seriously means that they're going to help their child navigate this relationship maturely and in a way that's not going to affect their entire future, right? Now, they said that their side gets emotional maturity, and yet even though my third speakers already stated, they've never given us a mechanism as to how this maturity is going to manifest as they grow older, right? We don't see how at a young age, learning that the relationship is something that they shouldn't give much seriousness about, learning that the relationship is oh, whatever, even if it doesn't end up well, it doesn't matter anyways. We don't see how this narrative that they've been learning since they're young is going to lead to them getting more emotional maturity when they get older. Whereas on our side of the house, where these kids actually have a support system, actually have parents and society treating this relationship seriously, telling them oh, how should I balance this relationship with other things, and how are you supposed to treat this relationship and be and take it well, right? We see that when they have all these lessons and they have all this support when they're younger, and when it's not trivialized when they're younger, we see that this result in so much more emotional maturity on our side of the house when they've had so much experience with this before, right? Now, lastly, they say that the young adults on our side of the house are going to get hurt so much more because of the relationships, right? However, even if that was the case, we'd rather have these kids getting hurt because they actually took the relationship seriously more than these actual adults getting hurt because they suddenly started taking their relationship seriously when they're older. And because they have a support system when they're younger, more than when they're adults, and they have their own working job, they have to actually work to get money, right? We see that it's so much better for them to get hurt by the breakup and when they're younger than when they're older. Okay, so now going on to the criteria that my first speaker said for us to win the debate, right? First, how trivialization of young love leads to the lack of emotional maturity for young adults. As our side has already proved, we've already given you so many examples of how when this young love is trivialized for kids, even if they do get into relationships, these relationships are treated not seriously. These kids are not getting taught how to manage it well. Whereas on their side of the house, they say that, oh, it's fine if they treat it with no emotional maturity when they're younger. It doesn't matter anyways. When they get older, they're gonna naturally get it anyways. And that's why we're so proud to propose.
I would like to thank opposition government reply for their reply. Speaker's performance 18 seconds. I would now like to invite both sides of the house to cross floor and shake hands.
Guys, please stay on the. Stay there. I have managed that myself. I have not. Collaboration. Sorry.
อย่าแล้วดูอย่าแล้วดู in front of the podium.